MRI scan on me, and he could not, when the x-ray came back, he could not find anything wrong. So I went back to work, and I was working for a short while, and I said, I need to go back to the doctor. Nothing's getting resolved and I'm getting worse. Again, they sent me down to Human Resources. Human Resources said, because the doctor couldn't find anything wrong, that they were not going to allow me to go back to the doctor. They stated that they should have never hired me and I didn't know what I was doing. Well, I went back to work and I was frustrated and upset and angry and, of course, sore. I was married. I talked to my wife and I went to an orthopedic surgeon through her insurance carrier, her provider. I told him what was going on and he ordered an MRI x-ray of me. The x-ray came back and I went to see him, and he said to me, and I brought the x-ray from the first doctor that couldn't find anything wrong, and he put the x-rays up, first the one from the doctor in the small town where I had the first MRI done. And he called me off of the exam table and he showed me the x-rays. And he says, this is the x-ray that you brought me, that you had done first. And I said, yes, you're right. And he says, this is the x-ray that I did. Okay. The first x-ray, if you can see it, shows lines, and then it shows a vertical line, and then it shows horizontal lines. And what as the doctor was explaining to me, he says, this first x-ray that they took of you, MRI x-ray, is of your back. Now, the second x-ray that he had taken is this x-ray. Now here, if you can see, it shows your pelvic structure, and this is the right femoral head or hip bone that swivels in the socket. Now the doctor told me, he says, if the company, or if the first orthopedic surgeon had x-rayed your hip and your pelvic area, they would have found out what was wrong. But the first orthopedic surgeon x-rayed your back, and that's why he couldn't find anything wrong. And if the company that you work for had allowed you to go back to this doctor, he might have x-rayed your hip, but he didn't, because the company wouldn't let him go back. So what has transpired is I was misdiagnosed and mis-x-rayed, and the second orthopedic surgeon told me, he says, because of the condition of your right femoral head, the femoral head is rounded and it swivels in your hip socket. And there were 3 gray areas on that femoral head. And he says, what has happened is, he says, the blood supply, which carries lubricant and nutrients to your femoral head, has been disrupted, and there are 3 gray areas, and it is beyond prevention, and at some point, depending on how you use your hip, you will need a total hip replacement. When the doctor told me that I was in a stupor, I didn't really understand what he was saying. The doctor said, hold on a minute, and he left the room and he came back and he says, hold out your hand, and he put an artificial hip in my hand, and it was heavy. It weighed approximately 5 to 7 pounds. And I thought, how am I going to be able to move my leg with that much weight in there? But everything still wasn't sinking in. I went back, well, when I left the doctor's office and I went out in the parking lot, I went around the side of the building, and by then everything was starting to click, and I was realizing what he was saying. And I just cried for about 20 minutes before I could get in my car to drive home. I got home and I told my wife, and she was upset, and the next day I went to work and I told my supervisor what the second doctor had said. And my supervisor said, this should not have to have happened to anyone. And he was angry and upset, yet my forklift seat still had not been changed. I continued to use it and get worse and worse and worse. Then, sometime later, the company, because of the findings of what had happened to me, and I was the only one that had a cockpit style seat, the company got rid of all their mismatched forklifts, including mine, and ordered brand new forklifts. The brand new forklifts were propane, and they did not cause the forklifts. The new forklifts came with a flat, wide seat. None of them were concave. At the factory, they were manufactured with a cockpit style seat, but the company insisted that they modify the forklifts, the brand new forklifts, and have a long, wide, flat seat put on. 5 out of the 6 forklifts were delivered as they so ordered and modified, and the 6th forklift came in, and everybody was on the front dock, and that forklift was not modified. It had a cockpit style seat on a brand new propane forklift. And the supervisor came out on the dock and smashed his fist on the forklift seat and said, make sure Steve Hatcher doesn't get this forklift. Now, while I was working for this company and they had the old forklifts, there were problems with carbon monoxide, and this company dealt with food packaging, raw materials, and then finished product. So this carbon monoxide was giving people headaches. There was a cloud in the building. There was no heat, no air exchanger in the building. And in the winter time, the first winter that I worked there, and the carbon monoxide levels were so high, the company or the supervisor of the warehouse would open up the dock doors to get the carbon monoxide out. And here we're all freezing. And with me wearing a snowmobile suit and sitting cockeyed, or sitting at a 45-degree angle across this cockpit style seat that was actually digging into my hip and cutting